Hey, this is Chelik Aleph or HaKodesh, Perek Vav, part two, second half, just because it's a very long piece. So, what we were talking about in the first half was it's going to flow right into the second half, and you should also check out the introduction video for this whole Perek. But the point we kind of ended the last video with was talking about how when you have the way reality is structured, as you have the intangible sort of translating or converting or materializing into the tangible in reality. And what we were sort of saying was that the last paragraph we ended off with, which is that the more you incorporate a holistic perspective that includes all the different parts of yourself, and you also simultaneously or in parallel see the broader reality that is outside of you in the same way, it kind of makes things more balanced and whole and softens them. It softens relationships. It deepens our perception, our understanding, and it kind of makes us more, basically makes us more effective. And the example we were talking about really was about, one example was about insecurities, how insecurity basically means that you feel threatened in some aspect of yourself, because when you compare yourself relative to other people who have the same trait in some larger way. So if you evaluate yourself according to your looks, and there are other people who are better looking than you, evaluate yourself according to your finances, and there are people who are more financially successful than you. So then those relative comparisons, where it's me over here and you over there, so that causes insecurity, because then you start to feel like, well, they are a threat to me. I am other than them, and they're a threat. And what we're really discussing here is when you start to incorporate a less fixated approach. In other words, think of it as like your mind is full of different boxes and different slots, and each of these different things, you can see each one of them in a more whole or a less holistic type of way. So if you view your looks, again, as something which you're very fixated on them, and you don't see the totality of what they are in terms of the intangible side translating into the tangible, then you'll be more prone to comparing yourself to somebody else, because you're fixating it in a relative way. Now I'm too much on the tangible side, and tangibility is about relativity. It's this tangible things can be separate. There's a tangible thing over here and a tangible thing over there, and I can compare this one to that one. But once you start incorporating intangible aspects, like this is a manifestation of you, and that somehow you are part of this larger whole on the intangible side, and that other person who might have better looks or more money or a different situation that you are in some way insecure about yourself and sort of projecting it onto them. So when you look at them with the intangible sides more in harmony and incorporated into the perspective, you're no longer threatened by that situation or that person, because that person in that situation is actually a part of you. That's just another aspect of you, because your real self, you and they are really one person, each working with a different set of tools. You have your looks and your money and your relationships and your life situation, and you also have that one through them, because you're just one self manifesting in different ways. We call that achdos. We call that being a chaver, which means that you are connected, from the language of chibur. And really, kol Yisrael chaverim, and really, in a deeper sense, all human beings are chaverim in this way, that we're all just different frames of reference for oneself. And so these understandings really soften a lot of our perspectives. They reduce the scarcity perspective. They reduce the tension that we feel to try to compete with other people in an intense way, and allow us to become more balanced, where we can both be an intangible self and yet know how to use all of our relative tangible tools and skills in a way that it is in harmony with all the other selves, and you learn how to basically dance with everybody else around you. So that's what this whole piece is kind of about in terms of understanding the structure of Maisa Bereshis, Maisa Merkava. And we're just going to kind of proceed with the second half here, which is going to kind of talk also again with the same hopeful language that we've been discussing in the previous videos, about sort of seeing what the potential of this perspective really is. It's not just a nice idea, or a nice set of ideas, or good Dvar Torah. This is like a perspective that unleashes all of our abilities in a profoundly intense way, and it makes us whole in a way that's not just like, I'm going to work on myself, or I'm going to work on this midah. Those are terminologies that are kind of taken from this system in small slices, and then isolated in terms of the way they're usually taught or understood, and then that kind of takes away from their power, because a midah here means exactly the same box as we were just talking about. If you want to work on a certain midah so you can work on it, you can start to view your fixation or your tangible, fixation with your money and your identification of yourself as your career, let's say, and you can work on that one piece. But if you don't have a big overarching picture that explains to you where that fits in the larger scheme of things, then that quantity, in other words, the particular quantity of obsession with your career, which is what the word mida means, a quantity. So you won't really have a place to really contextualize that, and then you end up, again, still being warped, because even if you are a little bit more in integrating of the intangibles into your tangible aspect of that particular thing, in the career as an example, and you sort of see how that fits into, there's also intangible side to it. It's not just about making money, it's also about being able to provide for other people that you care about or something like that, which is true. But if it's still isolated from the rest of the picture, then you'll still have other things that contradict and that don't fit together in your perspectives in your mind, and then that will really impede your ability to fully unleash all of your capacity, because the more integrated and holistic and put together you become, the more every single part of you begins to work in harmony with every other part, and the machine becomes extremely well-oiled in the totality of what you are, and then your ability to interact with the world around you also becomes more well-oiled, and you become confident and yet sensitive and yet empathetic and yet intelligent and thoughtful, and all these things become more and more and more pronounced. That's how you really grow. And so this is really a very powerful tool or way of thinking that really unleashes growth in a way that it's quantum. It's not just like small steps where in 40 years from now or 20 years from now you're still making the same New Year resolutions or whatever, Rosh Hashanah Nadarim or not Nadarim, that you are going to try to do something this year which you didn't do last year. We're talking about going from 0 to 60 in a much shorter time and becoming a completely different type of person in how you operate, which is really quantum growth. That is what happens when you move away from a perspective that is about just working on small slices and aspects of your character, and you dig deeper into the perception side of things, which is where all of your characteristics really are based. I mean, you can actually deepen your perception of things, and the way you do things will then follow. And so that's a much more, it's exponentially more powerful to try to deepen your perception than it is to just work on character traits or habits. So that's really now the second half is going to kind of focus on the almost organic trend that's going on all the time in each of us and in the world to constantly trend towards more and more and more evolution in that way. And that's really because the setting that we live in, what Rav Kook uses the word in other places called hishtalmut, we are in the setting of becoming more shalem, more in harmony, whereas Hashem, the side of reality that is static, which we call Yud Kei Vav Kei, which is transcendent of space and time, so that's shalem, and we are the side of reality that is mishtalem, and that's the whole realm we're talking about. Going from intangible to intangible is essentially the place where things are constantly in flux and changing, but the underlying dynamic and path of those things is constant growth, constant evolution. And growth here means expansion of consciousness, more and more and more self-awareness in each of us. Now, what's tricky is that that's really on the whole. In a big picture, it's like that. On an individual level, each person will have their fluctuations, and even they'll still be developing, but they will have much less awareness of what those developments are unless they are really keying in to specifically focusing on becoming more self-aware, which is why it's so integral and important to really try to learn about self-awareness and what it is and how to develop it further and further, because the key to all other aspects of our character, other aspects of this whole system, the whole structure of what you are, is self-awareness. So let's read a little bit. Ruchaniyut holecha, that's the bottom of this page if you have the HaKodesh edition, the paragraph that we finished off right before that. Haruchaniyut, haruchaniyus, holeches hi umis'ala ba'adam va'olam. So the intangible side of reality is constantly evolving, constantly expanding. It's like a wave. It kind of has to keep expanding in that way. In each individual person and in the reality around us. That's actually the Megillas Esther Purim story is really about how you see the evolution of the intangible self kind of spreading and manifest in all these little ways. And the overall trend of Megillas Esther is just to make things go the way that Hashem wants, as each individual party is kind of doing their own little individual dance. So, b'chol rega shel chaim, every instant, all the time, it's a constant process that is ongoing. Ve'haskala yona tofeses ba'akarasa es harikum shel ha'ilui. And, if your high-level understanding, your capacity to understand things, the part of your mind that is not just instinctive or primitive, that is not just emotionally driven or fear-driven, but the part that is able to really process and think carefully and really put things together. So that recognizes harikum shel ha'ilui, kind of like the pattern or the interweaving and complexity of this increasing process. You look at the world around you, you see it. I mean, look at the way the world works today versus 10 years ago, versus 20 years ago, versus 30 years ago. I mean, you're literally seeing a pattern of just complexity, evolution, and interwoven elements and dynamics that are constantly, climbing and expanding and evolving. And that's really what we were speaking about with technology examples to sort of show that. We'll show you what's happening right in front of you. Technology is not an external, separate factor. It is what we're talking about. This is the process of domination and of expansion and creativity as we become more and more and more whole into going into the Olam Haba phase. The Misadenes Meirav Ziv, and then at the Haskalah Yonah, so becomes softened, becomes more sweetened or gentle by this process. Umeadenes Olam Kulo, and the whole world becomes like that. Also becomes more softened because of this ruchaniyut that is constantly evolving and expanding. When this intangible side of things kind of becomes more whole at its pace, and now it wants means like it's kind of spreading, so there's a momentum. It's kind of driven to expand more because of all of the satisfactory results. Like as you get more, like just to use an individual person's example, as opposed to the universal, the world level of it, as you become more whole in these ways and you get more put together, so then you're going to keep wanting more. Like I want to push back further and understand more and figure myself out more deeply, and then be able to use it to connect more deeply to people around me. So L'Kikar Yosher L'Ishdi means to like get to a point or a place that is even more essential, even more deep and more rich. And that kind of means that the whole environment becomes more focused on this. It kind of drives like an accumulation, like it's an avalanche of that. More and more and more, drive towards that. And then the echo of that, it's kind of like it's exactly what an echo is. An echo is the sound that it starts here and then it bounces, comes back to you, bounces back. It's like these things are snowballing as you have more and more and more of this ruchaniyut, the intangible side of reality, becoming more harmonized and more deeply expressed on the Ma'aseh Merkava level of things, and becomes more visible. So then it essentially just it ping-pongs, because then you experience that and then you want to do more, so you push back and then you search out more and it becomes more, and then people around you also do more of that, and then it becomes more and more focused on that. That's what you're really seeing now. It's fascinating to read books that are written by non-Jewish people and secular authors of all kinds that capture these ideas in so many different forms, because these ideas are the ideas of the time period, and it's because this is Hashem's way. It's not just that we have to just learn a lot of Gemara and then just wear black hats. And now Hashem's going to eventually bring Mashiach or something. Like, this is Mashiach. You're watching the freeing of the minds of literally millions of people, slowly but surely, as we uncover perspectives and understanding of reality that frees us from the small-minded and the Meitzarim, the narrow perspectives, narrow ways of Mitzrayim, for what's called the Geula Shlema, the next part, which is the freeing of us. It's the Geula of that. If you want to see the Ramban's comments on the Geula, you can look at his Akdama and to Sefer Shmos, but as an example of this, but there's plenty of other examples as well. That's what we're really looking at right now. We're looking at a freeing, a Geula that is incrementally taking place on every level in the society. And yes, there's a lot of problems and a lot of false missteps and issues, and 100%, but when you get caught up on those in an intense way and don't see the bigger picture, then you're actually yourself falling into the Mitzrayim, because then you're not, like, again, it's important to relate to those individual situations, and each of us has a particular role to play, as each one of those situations might in some way reach us individually. But if you don't have the capacity to see that bigger trend and the bigger picture, then you're basically trapped inside of this small space also, and you get so caught up in that it can really take away from your ability to be nigal. You're not free in your mind, not able to learn or think in a way that's really whole and real, and you get caught up in debates and arguments and what, the politics example is great for nowadays, the last few months with Donald Trump as the president, and there's so many things to argue about and so many things to say, this is a problem, this no, and this should be this way, and these are even valid points. They're very important points, and they're things that need to be discussed. But if you get so caught up in that, now you hate other people in your life, or now you don't see the bigger picture of what your relationship is with the people that you're also talking to, because these things start to consume and become more, you fixate on them in your mind, that is Mitzrayim. That is a perspective that is small, and that is not part of this, and it's something which is it's a low place to be mentally. So, as an example, Facebook is a great context for this kind of thing. It's very easy to not, since you don't know anybody on Facebook when you talk to them. So people just come with kind of like the great equalizer. Everyone is on the same plane, so no one knows who anybody else is. So people just write something that they think, and the other person will immediately project onto it, well, he must think about it the way that I think he shouldn't think about it. So then they argue with each other. And then you get comments between friends who even known each other, even not on Facebook, will say things like, well, if you think that, then I can't be friends with you anymore, or I can't respect somebody who says that. I mean, like, that kind of statement, to decide to not respect somebody anymore, that you can't be friends with somebody anymore because of something that they said, is a kind of thing that you really need a lot of thought, and you need to decide. Like, you don't make a decision like that on the spot, definitely not in a writing, communication type of format like that, where there's a few, like, one-liners going back and forth, or even, paragraphs that are written. Like, it's the kind of thing that you go out with someone, you get coffee, you talk about it a little bit, you try to figure out what you really think, and then you decide if this relationship is so damaging to your perception and makes you so much more narrow that it's actually not healthy for you to be in the relationship with this person anymore. But to say these things at Facebook is the biggest joke, because it's silly, because you don't even have a real connection with them, so you're just spewing out your own things from a subjective place without even knowing who it is you're saying them to. They're not receiving that, so it's basically gratuitous. You're just sending out your own things. And on the other side of it, even if it's someone that you do have a connection with, so you're basically showing how the relationship didn't mean anything to you in the first place, because if you're willing to just cut off a relationship with such a shallow approach, so then what did the relationship even mean? That shows the relationship was not even a real thing. And that's really a fascinating phenomenon, because it's a narrow way that is becoming even narrower because the environment lends itself to that. So in order to have a conversation on Facebook, by definition, you have to think of it as a conversation, not as just a sounding board for us to spew things at each other. If it is going to be a sounding board for us to just spew things at each other, well, there's very little productivity that comes out of that. You don't get exposed to too much in terms of the comment and social side of things that is particularly meaningful, because whatever it is that they're saying, they probably agree with you much more than you realize. It's just that the context itself is designed to create adversarial interaction by definition. So this is ignoring the other utilities that a context like Facebook has, like news sharing and other information that is more properly set up for proper communication. But just as a point to sort of think about that. So L'or tov zeh, so just to continue, so we're saying that these things accumulate. This type of clarity and depth kind of becomes a snowball. L'or tov zeh l'mabak hazeh, this light, this constant spreading of this depth of understanding, al osa ha'afela shechachmas ha'chaim ha'beinonis kor'a zeh maves mechaka ha'olam, this light which is going to kind of overwhelm or impact the darkness that we call, the lower level systems call death. So the world is waiting for that to hit that. We're waiting for these things to wash over death and just blast it away. And that's really what we're saying when like we mentioned in the previous video, that according to the Torah, death is not a thing. Death just means that now there's going to be a temporary shutting down of the tools that we usually use to translate the intangible self that is not in a place or in a time, the self, the neshama, to translate it into a format that can interact with other selves, even the other selves, because we're all one self. So we have to find a way to sort of like separate to create a frame of reference where I can kind of look at myself from another vantage point, which is what me looking at you is. You looking at me is that. It's that I'm over here, you're over there, but it's really just one self that kind of now is looking at itself from a different vantage point. So death just means that now that separation process, what we call tzimtzum, the breaking apart of a self in terms of its perception or perspective into two frames of reference, is shut off temporarily, at least somewhat, which in the phase that we call death. And what happens as a result of that, we're trying to sort of show that the long term of that is nothing, that the real reality that we're going to be living in is immortal, endless life in bodies that don't shut down like that anymore. And the way we're going to develop the ability to destroy death is by realizing and learning and more deeply harnessing the truth that we are actually not our bodies, we are endless consciousness, part of a consciousness matrix that we call the nishmasin, the self of all selves, the anochi, that is now separated into different frames of reference. When you can actually discover that in a real way and harness that, so then death is not a thing anymore. It's just a question of us figuring out how do we then find that frame of reference of that consciousness that used to be the Zev Banit form of it, for example, or any other person whose body dies. We have to figure out a way to kind of reattach or recreate that frame of reference of the Zev Banit frame of reference, and then he lives again. Even after his body turns off, he can create a new body that will recreate that frame of reference for that consciousness. So that's really what we're trying to create, and that's what Tchias HaMesim is. It's the final harnessing of the things we need to do in order to mimic, or not even, or reproduce the reproduction that we do already. The fact that a woman's body combined with a man's body can create a vessel or a tool that actually is a manifestation of consciousness, that happens somehow. That's a real phenomenon. I mean, we're all products of that. So it can be done. We just have to figure out how it works, and we're going to get there as we more and more uncover the secrets of what a neshama is and what consciousness really is, which is what the Torah is itself. It's the ultimate. It's supposed to be the ultimate theory of consciousness. So that's really what we're describing here. The active decision to kind of like to go in that way is what brings that powerful change and that powerful development in reality. The decision to continue to evolve in these ways. So the social, the connective parts of life, with all the different aspects of how they kind of work together. HaKodesh, freedom of thinking, of processing, of understanding. V'hargeshi, also emotional freedom. With all of their broadness. And also the power and strength of the intangible side, and the power and discipline of the body in terms of, in its strength and sturdiness and its beauty. All these different facets of us, basically. Each of these things will become kind of integrated. It just means integrated, put together properly for forever. Because only these things, when they're properly put together, you can think of it as like a puzzle. The patra means that they're put together where they belong. Each part kind of in its place. When they're all working together in that way, then they will really stand forever at the time that they need to do that. Only perceptions that come from above. In other words, you pick up a perspective of reality that comes from around you, but there are also ways of seeing reality that are beyond, that are from outside of the system, and we're trying to tap into those constantly. We call that expanding our minds. So seeing things in a deeper way. So only those types of perceptions that emanate from that core, the Chachmas HaKodesh HaPoelos, that system that is outside, objective and kind of beyond. That will bring to the world and everything in it. All the selves, all the lost fragments of consciousness, means us, when we're in our small spaces we're lacking, we're missing what it is that we need. And I mean, people feel like that all the time. Like we all fill those holes with all kinds of counterfeit options, like other very flawed relationships or activities, or there's all kinds of things that we do for filler, and we're all like looking for this immortality. We're looking for this balance and wholeness. And where is that? So, and all those who are kind of dwelling in darkness, in sick, unbalanced bodies, that are damaged and dirty. As they're looking for the strength of their lives. As the lightning of the brilliance. It means like it's like the shine, like the intensity of their immortality, of their endlessness. And like the harmony of all reality and the beauty of all of the intangible sides and the bodies, in the bodies. Yashuvi Galeb and will eventually be revealed above all limitations and all structures, which is really what we've been saying the entire time. And I hope that's relatively clear. I think it pretty much captures the idea we're trying to say here, which is basically to try to expand and to create a more integrated perspective of all of these things. That is